Playing Nirvana.
The Cobain 50.
Nirvana.
Kurt Cobain's top 50 albums.
Nirvana.
From listener-powered KEXP.
This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. I'm Dusty Henry.
And I'm Martin Douglas. This week, Dusty dives into What Is It? A compilation from various artists. And yeah, what is it, Dusty?
What is it? What's happening? What are we doing? What? This is maybe the most obscure record on a list of fairly obscure records for the general public, I'd say. Yeah, so this is a compilation from What Records, which is, there's a question mark in the name. Lots of LA punk, hardcore punk, featuring the Germs, KAOS, the Controllers, and lots of deep LA punk cuts.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's not dwell on this too much. Let's just get into the episode. This is Dusty covering the compilation. What is it?
We've talked about a lot of iconic record labels on this series. So much so that it's worth doing a quick roll call. There's, of course, DC hardcore label Dischord Records that we just talked about on our episode on the Faith and Void split EP. They also put out classics from Rites of Spring and Fugazi, among many, many others. Long Beach's SST Records, helmed by Black Flag's Greg Ginn, which not only put out his band's records, but also classic albums from Soundgarden, Sonic Youth, and Bad Brains. British indie label Rough Trade, who of course put out albums from huge groups like The Smiths, but also some of Kurt's favorite records from The Raincoats, Kleenex, and Young Marble Giants, who we just talked about in our last episode.
Feeling like I'll be dead before I'm old, teaching myself to be the young and told.
Closer to home, there's Olympia's K Records, founded by Beat Happening's Calvin Johnson, who also put out records from influential acts like Bikini Kill, Modest Mouse, and Shonen Knife. And if we're talking about close to home, how could we not talk about Sub Pop, the label that put out Mudhoney, Sunny Day Real Estate, and Nirvana. Which brings us to one of the most iconic, foundational, pivotal labels. What? No, really, what? The name of the label is What Records? What? You don't know What Records? Okay, no one could really fault you for not knowing What Records. To be honest, this episode was my own introduction to the label through this very obscure compilation on Kurt's list. All around, feels very on brand for our podcast namesake. But I will say that it is enriching when you learn more about this label and the role it played in LA's rising punk scene. You'll feel that with some of the bands on the list, like the Controllers, the Skulls, the Dills, and a pretty pivotal punk band that we'll get to later. Maybe to set the table, we should go back to journalistic basics. The who, what, where, when, and why. Who's what, what's what, when's what, where's what, and why was what.
Well, all I'm trying to find out is what's the guy's name on first base?
Oh, no, what is on second base?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Okay. I will try to keep the what jokes to a minimum from here on out. The story of what starts in a record store. Chris Ashford was fresh out of high school in 1975, working at various LA record stores, namely Licorice Pizza and Music Odyssey. Being surrounded by so much music meant his taste was rapidly developing. As he told the website Horror Garage, which we'll reference frequently in this piece, he began to get a taste for anything from Roxy music to Tanya Tucker to the Stooges.
You're alone and you got the fear. So am I, baby, let's move on out of here. Raw power shoulder come running to you.
Being in LA, the entertainment capital of the world, he had a front row seat to all the great music coming from his city and all the big tours, catching early gigs from proto-punk icons like Patti Smith and Devo. But it was back at the record stores that his journey really got started. Working behind the counter, he struck up a conversation with two skateboarding high school punks who frequented the shops, George Ruthenberg and Jan Paul Beam, who went by Paul. They get to talking and ended up hanging out more and more outside of the store. Ashford told Horror Garage, "I think in the scheme of things, you meet people that you're supposed to meet for whatever reason. You don't know it at the time, though." Paul and George eventually got kicked out of their high school for antisocial behavior and mind control, whatever that might mean. When Ashford started working at another LA record store, Peaches on Hollywood Boulevard, Paul and George finally made good on their threat to start a band and began searching for members. Suddenly, Ashford had an idea. He told the dynamic duo, "Let's find out how to make a record." Ashford recalls, "I didn't start What Records to start a label. I think as a unison mind, I was the piece of the puzzle that was making the record while they were making the band." Truthfully, Ashford didn't know what went into making a record. He reached out to his friend Richard Foos, who worked as the small storefront shop for the label Rhino Records. He asked Foos where he pressed a single from eccentric street performer Wildman Fisher. And if you're curious where Rhino Records was, well, Fisher's single spells it out for you.
Go to Rhino Records on Westwood Boulevard. Go to Rhino Records on Westwood Boulevard. They have nice people there. They'll show you where the records are. Where are the records? They're over there. They're all over the place.
This is basically how he pieced together each step of the record-making process. Ashford says his motivation was primarily fueled by his love of record collecting. He says, quote, "I think because I loved records so much, and obviously I loved music, of course, but part of my personality is that I've always been into that final thing that you can hold and read and do whatever with. That probably pushed me over to that side more, but I wasn't trying to push to be in a group because I had enough insecurities and lack of talent to push me that way." End quote. Meanwhile, Paul and George had brought in two more members, bassist Teresa Ray, who would go by Lorna Doom, and drummer Jimmy Grassetti, who would go by Don Bowles. George would play guitar, and Paul would take lead vocals. They also gave themselves new names, Pat Smear and Bobby Pin, though he'd later change it to Darby Crash. They first wanted to call themselves Sophistifuck and the Revlon Spam Queens, but allegedly decided against it because it'd be too expensive to print that on a t-shirt. Instead, they settled on a different name, the Germs. The Germs were destined to go down in punk infamy, but before they would get there, they needed to take their first steps. The newly donned Pat Smear got a hold of a Sony 2-track recorder, and the band banged out a song in his family's garage. With the recording done, and Ashford having finished up his research into figuring out how you do any of this shit, they sent it off to the pressing plant. Not knowing exactly how serious the Germs were and how serious the label was, Ashford played it tongue-in-cheek and called the project What Records? In one fell swoop, both the Germs and What Records were born.
Forming, take one.
Now, open me up, tell them that I'm your brother. Pull my sugar, I'm bigger than. Listen to presents, bring right out. Listen to says we're coming out. Infiltration of your mind. Concentration, losing time. Listen down, open me up, tell them that I'm your brother. Pull my sugar, I'm bigger than. Over there, the queen, she says the family mountain. Try to get saturation, wanted taxi, saturation. We got gas, listen down, open me up, tell them that I'm your brother. Pull my sugar, I'm bigger than.
The song was called Forming, an apt title for the newly formed band. The record arrived in 1977 in a paper white sleeve. On the front is a black and white photo of the band in the garage, all clad in leather jackets and boots, with an upside-down American flag behind them. On the back reads a note. The owner of this label, What Records, warns that this record may cause ear cancer. On the B side of the record was an untitled live recording the fans would later come to know as an early version of the Germs' classic, Sex Boy. The song was actually recorded and filmed at the Roxy as a part of the Cheech and Chong movie Up in Smoke, though their appearance wouldn't make the final cut.
When, boy? When? Are you gonna get your act together?
Gross.
Oh, good God almighty me. I think he's the Antichrist.
Got television, got supervision, no sin for you. Me a blip, me a hit wheel.
The band wasn't necessarily well received right away. The Germs reveled in playing an antagonistic role in the punk scene. Ashford recalls the first time the Germs played the Orpheum, where the band threw peanut butter all over the stage. And another later show where they covered the Archie's Sugar Sugar while throwing salad dressing everywhere.
Sugar. Honey, honey. You my candy girl, and you got me wanting you.
There's a lot more to say about the Germs, one of the most foundational artists to hardcore punk, but we only have so much time for them in an episode about an entire compilation. They'd put out only one record, the remarkable GI in 1979, produced by Joan Jett. Yes, the Joan Jett. The band's rise was documented in the legendary punk film series, The Decline of Western Civilization. Here's Smear being interviewed in the film.
I've probably punched out everybody I know at one time or another, but I've always ran afterwards because I can't fight. The police were all calling me names, and they made me take a shower because they said I smell, and they asked me why I don't wash my clothes more often.
The band would split in 1980 due to mounting tensions and increased drug use among the members. Later that year, Darby Crash died by suicide, intentionally overdosing on heroin. He was just 22 years old. Over a decade later, Smear would join another infamous punk band when he was approached by Kurt Cobain to join Nirvana as second guitarist for their In Utero tour. Here's Smear talking about Nirvana in the Foo Fighters documentary, Back and Forth.
I was a really big fan of Nirvana, like everybody else. And I happened to be reading an interview with Kurt where he had mentioned in the interview, Nirvana was always meant to be a four-piece. It's meant to be a two-guitar band. It was never meant to be a three-piece. And I thought, oh, well, that's my end.
While Smear only appeared on live albums like Unplugged in New York and From the Muddy Banks of the Wishkah, he was considered a full-fledged member of the band at the end. He would also later join Dave Grohl in his project, Foo Fighters. Throughout the rise and fall of the Germs, Ashford continued What Records. One night while working at Peaches, he was approached by Peter Urban, who managed LA Punk's The Dills. Ashford recalls Urban saying, "We really like your Germs single. Would you be interested in putting out our record?" That's when it first started really clicking, Ashford says. "Okay, cool. I'll put this out, and now I have a little label. What am I going to do?" Then things kept ramping up more, releasing split singles featuring more underground punk from bands like The Eyes, The Controllers, and The Skulls. And in 1980, he put out the 3-song EP Product of a Sick Mind by short-lived group KAOS. All of these bands would eventually be collected on the 1982 What Records compilation called What Is It?, which somehow made its way into the hands of Kurt. You would be hard-pressed to find a compilation that could distill so succinctly and vitally the underbelly of LA's punk scene from that time. What Records continued going on for a while in the 80s. But then Ashford got an offer he couldn't refuse from the Lord. Okay, not the Lord, but a Christian music label called Word Records approached Ashford about buying the name What Records. Ashford says, "At that point, I think I was poor enough where I decided to work out a deal and take the money." He adds, quote, "What had kind of lost its identity anyway, because I did various different things. It wasn't just punk rock, and people weren't that interested in the old punk at that point. To me, the name change was kind of a hassle. It was one of those situations when you're involved with things, you don't necessarily look into the future and think people are going to care about these things you did before. I didn't think that what would make that much of a difference. In my thinking now, I made a mistake. But at the time, it just is what it is." Ashford continued label work. He formed I Low-Key Records, meaning I'm low-key, focusing on surf music. And more recently, he founded Wondercap Records, encompassing both the What and I Low-Key catalogs. He even reissued the What Is It comp in 2010. What Records might not have the name or reputation of some of the other labels we mentioned at the top of this episode, but that doesn't make it any less influential. Music scenes are built up by artists and fans who followed a whim to just try something. What Records is yet another testament to DIY. Shooting for an idea and just going for it. You never know the cascading effects there might be. If Ashford hadn't approached his 2 skateboarding punk friends about making a record, who knows what the butterfly effect might have been on the Germs, Nirvana, or punk history in general. Ashford's story is a reminder to take a leap. Say, F it, and see what happens. What could be more punk?
And that was Dusty covering the famous LA punk compilation, What Is It?
Famous being a really strong word.
Famous on a very, very underground level, like word of mouth, like straight up word of mouth famous.
Yeah.
Like in a time where nothing is word of mouth ever.
You're right.
I'm gonna venture to guess that, like me, you had never heard this compilation before.
No.
But yeah, okay. So what were your initial reactions to hearing this compilation for the first time days ago?
Yeah, I mean, it was cool. I mean, my initial thought on the list was, what is it? What is it? We're going to keep doing that. Sorry, everyone.
It's very much the who's on first of the Cobain 50.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, when I was going through the list when we first started the project, I signed up for this one because I was curious. Like, I have no idea what this is. And then looking at the track list and being like, oh man, this is the Germs, like all this great LA punk. I thought it was great. Like it was cool to get, like, just like we talked about with Faith and Void, it's kind of a cap on the scene we've talked about a lot, about LA punk and the whole, Black Flag and this whole scene down there. Lots of bands I didn't know. The song Neutron Bomb by the Controllers. Oh my God, that's like a new favorite punk track for me. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's hard to have much more opinion than I think it rips. It was incredibly hard to find. I will say that. Not on streaming, really.
A little behind the scenes information. Dusty literally made a YouTube playlist of this compilation that we have been referencing for this episode. Like, that is how hard this compilation is defined. And for me, it is one of maybe 3 or 4 albums on this entire list that I had never heard before. And that's because it's not available anywhere.
Right.
It's not on streaming. It's not on Bandcamp. There are no reissues. I haven't even thought to check Discogs because I can't even fathom how many hundreds of dollars this album goes for.
Yeah. I mean, that to me is also kind of an exciting part of it. I love finding something that is hard to find, and that's part of what drives me as a music fan is the thrill of the hunt, of trying to find that obscure thing. So I was kind of thankful to Kurt for putting it on this list because what is it? I want to know. And yeah, it's just a great compilation. I don't know, what did you think about it?
Man, it's right up my alley. As far as my taste today go, this is squarely in line with the stuff I listen to in my free time. I'm, a huge punk head, garage punk, hardcore punk, traveling all over the country to various punk rock festivals, going to one next month, in fact. Shout out to friend of the pod, Seesaw, the great punk newsletter. Subscribe to seesaw.fun, got to give my friend a plug. But yeah, this is, again, hadn't listened to it before, saw it on the list, was like, what is it? And when you made that YouTube playlist and I listened to it all the way through, literally the morning you sent it to me, I was floored. It's just such a good collection of great punk songs, which include the Germs, which is one of my favorite LA bands ever, regardless of genre.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Pat Smear, famously was in Nirvana near the end.
Yeah.
One of the coolest people on earth, I would say, one of the coolest guitarists on earth.
Absolutely. I've always wanted to meet Pat Smear and bend his ear on a couple things. So maybe one day, maybe because of this podcast, I'll be able to have a conversation with Pat.
Pat, if you're listening, hit us up. We'd love to talk. We'll make the time. Yeah, I mean, could you imagine, being Kurt and not only reaching your wildest dreams, becoming a huge rock star, but also getting one of your favorite guitarists from one of your favorite bands to join your band?
Man, I mean, from the interviews that I've read and listened to, I know that it really meant a lot to Kurt for Pat to join Nirvana for the very sadly short time that he did. And yeah, I can't even imagine. I would start a band today if I thought there was an opportunity for Pat Smear to join my band. It's just, yeah, it's so, I can't begin to talk about how much I love the Germs. Like, just one of those great visceral punk bands, like exemplifying everything that punk means to me personally, just that whole spirit. I love the Germs.
Yeah. And if you ever watched like the Decline of Western Civilization, like their story is so like, it's amazing, but also tragic. And you know, Pat's been through so much tragedy, losing Darby, losing Kurt, and now losing Taylor Hawkins. And he just still just exudes such a light as a musician that I just so appreciate. I've gone through so much. I don't know. He's just an inspirational person to me.
Yeah. Shout out to Pat once again. Shout out to Pat Smear, one of the greats in punk rock history. And yeah, let's move on from one of the greats of punk rock to this label that I feel as though is still obscure even in the realm of punk. What Records? Tell me what you found out about What Records.
Well, first we should distinguish that What Records is different from What Records. There's two different labels, and I got very confused because I looked up What Records, and the first thing that came up was a Christian music label from around the same exact time.
Wow.
As What Records.
I find it pretty amazing that there was, amazing may not be the right word. I find it interesting that there was a Christian music label around this time, like in the early 80s. Because when I think of Christian rock, I think of like that Christian alternative movement that happened in the 90s, specifically like the mid 90s. Yeah. And so yeah, it's kind of weird to think about a Christian music label that was doing their thing in the early 80s.
Would have been even weirder if they put out the Germs. They did a few other compilations, a surf compilation, which sounds right up your alley. A couple of those, actually.
Yeah. Be interested to hear some of that.
A Mark Bolan interview that they pressed to vinyl.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. It just kind of has this sort of cool, chaotic punk spirit to it. And, I'm excited to keep going down this rabbit hole of What Records and trying to find out more, because really, like, you could think of history is written by the winners, as they say, right? Of like the major labels want to take credit for all these things, but like without labels like What Records or Discord or SST or any of these Sub Pop we've mentioned before, who knows what trajectory pop culture would take?
Right. I mean, because that's what happens. And again, I'm going to launch off on a little commentary on the nature of consumerism, but the big fish eat the little fish, and the popular trends of today come from the underground. And I think that it's so essential that we as music fans, and, even more specifically, you and I as music journalists, like, excavate this history and find out where stuff is coming from, because there's so many labels like What Records that existed for a short period of time in a period where not everything was documented like today, where everything is documented almost excessively.
Totally. And this kind of caps off we talked about Faith and Void capping off the DC punk. This kind of caps off LA punk in this series for us as well. We do have more records to go. Please keep subscribing. But yeah, it kind of got me thinking about, the legacy of these scenes of DC punk, LA punk, and even, the Seattle punk scene and how they all differed, but also influenced each other. And Seattle almost becoming a byproduct of both of these scenes, I'd say.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We've talked a lot about how where you're from seeps its way into what your music sounds like. And yeah, it's unavoidable to listen to Discord and hear that aggro sort of very political music. Is, it's very natural to hear a Seattle punk record and hear the mud and the grime and feel that sort of overcast when you're listening to that music, or like LA, where LA's kind of different because it's like, it's not necessarily what you might. Okay, yeah. The LA is kind of like not the glitzy Hollywood part of LA, but like the smog and the trash of, the Strip or downtown LA. Like it's so fascinating to me when I can hear something and be like, oh, that came from here. And you can hear the spirit of the region in that music.
Yeah, when I think about like LA punk, like I totally agree with you. It's not, Hollywood and glitz. It's like LA traffic. It's being stuck in traffic in like 90-degree heat with no air conditioner and just being like pissed off and like tense, and the rage in the punk music feels a little different. Like it's more just like angst of can you believe this is happening? Which is similar to DC in a way. But DC, like, appropriately is a lot more like, has that political slant to it. It's a little drearier in some ways. And then I imagine these records, like this compilation and like Minor Threat or whatever, arriving in Seattle just like totally soaked from the rain. You put it on and it moves a little slower because of all the sludge. And like that's how it gets transmuted through Green River, Nirvana, all these bands.
Yeah, and like you were saying, the Seattle punk scene, or what the Seattle punk scene is best known for, is kind of an amalgam of like a little bit from DC, a little bit from LA, a little bit from Chicago, and kind of, like mixed into a muddy ass stew.
Yeah. I always kind of like think about Seattle, I haven't lived here like my whole life, more or less, that, we're kind of the little sibling of big cities,
Yeah.
Everyone talks about New York and LA, like they're two of the biggest cities in the world. And Seattle, of course, grunge made a huge pop. I am not disparaging Seattle. Like, I want to live here. I want to die here. I love this place. But
I have a love-hate relationship with this place, but I won't get into that.
My take on that is to love Seattle is to hate Seattle too. So that's just kind of in our nature.
Very fair.
But yeah, I kind of like love that we've kind of like, we're the younger sibling that's like, I don't want to do what you guys did. No, you're going to play fast. We're going to play slow. But anyway, yeah, it's just really cool to kind of be part of that legacy of taking what we hear and making it our own thing. And I feel like Seattle doesn't really have a quintessential sound. I don't think grunge is Seattle sounds. I think it was a sound for a time.
Yeah.
And I just love that we are always kind of doing our own thing while also being very observant to what's going on around us.
Absolutely. And now we must say goodbye to the American hardcore scene. This is our final episode on a hardcore album on Kurt's list. How are we going to sum up hardcore and our relationship to hardcore.
I mean, I will say, I usually have some hardcore in my rotation, but this series has been the most prolonged hardcore music listening I think I've ever had over the past year, just on a consistent level. But I found, while I've always liked it and loved it to different degrees, I found just a new appreciation. I thought maybe I'd get burned out on it after a certain point during this project, but I really haven't. I think it's really opened my eyes, and I think the stories behind all these bands and how it's evolved different in different places, it inspires me. It makes me want to try new shit.
Slam dance.
Man, I just want to slam dance. I want to slam dance. That's how I'll sum it up.
I will say that because I've mentioned many times that I'm only a recent hardcore fan, I have listened to more hardcore over the course of this year in doing this series than I have in my entire life. And it has given me a newfound appreciation for the genre. And that extends to the point where I'm listening to new hardcore bands. I'm going back 10 years ago and listening to Hank and the Hammerheads. I'm listening to bands like Pyrex. I won't say I'm a hardcore guy, but I do appreciate hardcore, and I can say that I am a fan of the genre, which I don't think I would have ever thought to say, prior to doing the series.
That's awesome. We are forever changed.
We are forever changed. It's about the albums, but it's also about the friends we've made along the way.
That's right.
This episode was produced by Dusty Henry. Audio was mixed by Matt Martin and Roddy Nikpour. Special thanks to our friends Isabel Khalili and Larry Mizell Jr.
And a quick reminder, as always, we depend on your financial support to keep doing these podcasts and independent journalism at KEXP. If you want to help us out, become an amplifier or leave a one-time donation at kexp.org/Cobain. This project's been amazing. We are gaining so much out of it. We hope you are too. And even if you're not donating, if you're just listening and being with us every week, we really appreciate that. And thanks for making the Cobain 50 a thing. And support us financially if you can, but if not, we love you so much. With that, I'm Dusty Henry.
And I'm Martin Douglas. We'll see you next week on the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP, where the music matters. So yeah, what? Okay.
Okay.